Today we have a special treat for you. We have got Andy Tomlinson giving the presentation today about removing blockages from our lives. Andy Tomlinson is the founder and director of trainer for the Past Life Regression Academy, and he trains therapists around the world to go into source emotional problems and help the transformation through the clearance of these source problems so that clients can move forward in their lives in a healthy, integrated, healed way. Today he'll be sharing his wisdom with us about how we can look at removing blockages in our lives, and he will give us 4 basic steps to do so.
Hi, I'm going to talk to you about emotional energy blockages and how to clear them on part of your journey to the higher vibrations of the new consciousness. And I'm just going to talk about 1 or 2 examples of people that I've come across that have had these sort of blockages and the effects it has on them. The first person I'm going to talk about is a lady who was in her mid to late 30s, and she had an anger problem. An anger problem being that whenever there was any form of injustice, an emotional outpouring of anger would happen. At home, she was in constant arguments with her children and with her husband, and this was a pattern that had been going on for quite a long time. And she just kind of thought, well, that's me. I'm a person that just is angry. And I helped to go back to the first event that had happened, and she went back into the story of being a young girl, aged about 5 or 6, always wanted to be a dancer, a little ballerina, and her mum had brought her an outfit, and she'd put on this outfit and came into a room where mum was talking to a friend and put on the very best dancing ballerina act that she could. And her mum turned around to her friend and said about this little girl, "You'll never be a ballerina." And they both started laughing. And the anger built up inside this little girl. And of course, when people get angry, it's almost like holding the fists. And when the anger is kept in, the energy flows all the way down the arms, over the shoulders, and round the head. And that little girl suppressed the anger, and that was a source of the wound that she had. And what she didn't realise is whenever she got angry, it was this old wound that was being triggered that had never been resolved. But in addition, it created a tension in her shoulders. It was almost like the pattern of a physical and emotional situation was being recreated. And she always had a lot of tension in her shoulders, and she had migraines that affected her. And this was all from this particular wound that she'd been carrying all the years from being that little girl. The next story I'm going to tell you about is a person who I know and I did some work with, and they were a project manager, or he was a project manager in a corporate organisation, and he was extremely good at planning and managing and directing people. But the one problem that he had was when he'd done all of his plans and he presented them in front of senior management, it was quite common for senior managers to always try to push back. And if someone said the project's going to take 6 months, I'd say, well, why don't you do it in 5 months? And now most people would simply say, well, look, here's my plan. This is why it's going to take 6 months. And the managers would back off. But in the case of this particular person, he would just cave in. It was almost like he was powerless when someone in authority said something and he knew he couldn't do it. He would just quietly go off and then have a project that just wasn't delivered on time, which is a big thing for a project manager. And this had been a pattern that had been going on for some time. He'd been through to assertiveness training and negotiating skills, but none of this had any effect at all. And this was because there was an emotional wound at the source of it. So this was traced to a time when he was 5 or 6, and his father was quite a big man. He was a lay preacher with a big, loud, booming voice. And this little boy thought the world of his father. And one day he was at the top of the stairs, quietly looking down, and his father, not knowing who was there, was on a phone talking to a girlfriend that was someone who wasn't known to the rest of the family. And the conversation went along the lines of, yes, I love you. Yeah, I just need another week, and then I'm going to tell everybody, and I'll come and join you, and we'll set up a new life together. And that little boy went to his bedroom, and tears were pouring out. And eventually his mother came there and said, well, what's wrong? He said, well, Dad's leaving. He's going off with another lady. I heard him on the phone. So his mother said, Dad, come up here. And he came into the room, and she said to the little boy, you tell him the story that you told me. And in between sobs, he told a story of what he'd heard on the phone. And guess what his father said? Of course, he said, no, I wasn't on the phone. I didn't say anything. I'm not leaving. And of course, that put that little boy in a very difficult position, because either he had to say, Dad, you're a liar, or he had to say and deny what he'd seen and say, yep, you're right, you're not leaving, I didn't hear you on the phone. So in other words, he was denying his own truth. And as a result, he was experiencing powerlessness. And this was a pattern that kept repeating all the way through his life and was really affecting his working life in a very significant way. And the third story I'm going to talk to you about is a 21-year-old lady who came to see me. She was dressed in very smart clothes and almost like a supermodel in terms of appearance. And she told me the story of what had happened, and she'd been living with the rejection of her mother all of her life. And eventually she had cancer in her breast and had one of her breasts removed. And that was a wake-up call for her. And it was for her to find out, well, what is it that caused it? And she realised that the part of the body where she was holding the hurt and the rejection was in the same part of the body that had been affected by the cancer. And this is one of the things that happens when we hold an emotional wound, is it weakens energetically that part of the body, and it's much more susceptible for other factors to contribute to illness. And in this case, it was cancer of the breast. And what she did is she watched a reality program, and in this reality program there was confrontation of family members about particular issues, and it just happened whenever she was watching this reality program, it always seemed to be issues very similar to her own. And through listening to both sides, by listening to the perpetrator and the victim's stories, she was able to come to a place of forgiveness. She went through and found her mother and told her mother that she'd forgiven her for doing it. And her mother burst into tears and explained that she'd always wanted a boy, and that she was so sorry that she'd treated her the way that she had. So what I'm going to talk about with these 3 stories is 3 things associated with these wounds that are affecting people moving to the new consciousness. And the first is that our thoughts create emotions. Our emotions can create body tension in parts of the body, and over time weaken parts of the body where the energy wound is kept, and it can lead to serious illness. And it's almost like a way the soul has of bringing to our attention something that needs to be resolved. And it starts off with the emotional problem, a recurring patterns until someone's eventually wants to do something about it. And then if that doesn't work, then often ill health occurs. It's almost like our life force is a river that's flowing, and if there's a log jam, that life force just stops flowing and it becomes stagnant. And in the same way, when there's an energy blockage or an emotional wound, it blocks the life force around that part of the body where it's located. The second area that I really want to talk about is often with a lot of people that have had the original event happening in earlier childhood, then it's often below the level of conscious awareness, and all that's remembered is the whole series of patterns of what's been happening with that particular emotion that's being triggered. And getting to the source events is really important as part of the healing process, because that is the source. It's almost like when we get a thorn inside the under the skin, you know, rather than just putting sticking plaster on and letting the skin heal, but the thorn and the presence of the wound is still there, you have to pull out the thorn. And that means going into the source event and releasing the emotional trapped energy that's there. Almost a little bit like someone who's got a wound that's gone pussy, and you have to put a needle in, and in the process it allows that trapped energy to flow out. And in this case it can be crying or sobbing or release of anger through punching or kicking. It doesn't really matter, but it's like a release of the energy that needs to take place. So how does all this fit into a framework of moving to the new consciousness? Well, I'd like to refer to some teachings of Buddha, and he talked about the 4 steps to spiritual enlightenment, which is very similar to moving to the new consciousness. And he said the first thing you have to do is to understand you have a problem and want to do something about it. And if you choose to keep that wound and to say, well, this is how I am, you know, I'm never going to change, well, that's okay, this is your choice. Or you can choose to say, look, I want to move to the new consciousness, I want to go through and clear these wounds, and that's the very first step. The second step is to find out exactly what that source memory is and to release the catharsis associated with it, and to just allow that energy to be released and the life force of the body to flow in that area again. The third step is to get some sort of new understanding about the person. If it's a perpetrator, it's about their motives and why they did it. If there's guilt about something that you've done, then it's getting feedback from the victim, which is quite important to do. And then the fourth step rather is, once there's that level of understanding and forgiveness can be found, is to move into integration and to do something different whenever that situation arrives, to ensure that the pattern has been broken and the movement to the new consciousness has taken place. So, what can we do about it? Well, I'm just going to talk about a little life review that you can do just to get things into context. And if you get a pen and a paper, and on the x-axis, which is the line at the bottom, I'd like you to put your age from being born all the way to your current age. And then on the y-axis, which is the vertical one, I'd like you to put at the bottom unhappiness and at the top happiness. And then draw a line all the way from those early years all the way through to the current years. And you'll find it's going to go up and down, peaks and troughs. And then start examining some of the troughs and what the memories are associated with it, and particularly what were the emotions, and start looking for patterns of emotions. And then this is the clue of something you can make the objective to start to work through. In order to go through Buddha's later steps, there's a number of different strategies you could take. There's a lot of really good material on the internet and self-help books that you could use. You could go to a therapist that specialises in helping people go to the source of their emotional challenge and to clear the wound. And people who do regression can sometimes be called regression therapists, or there's hypnotherapists that specialise in doing regression. Any of those would be able to help. And the third approach is to do an online training which Reena's produced, which has got lots of practical tips to help clear these old wounds and to move, as she calls it, from being a victim to being a survivor. And it's called Empowering the Divine Feminine for the New Consciousness. So those are 3 different routes that you can do to go on this journey. And just remember, this is a soul journey, and as you clear one emotional challenge, then there may be a new one that comes through, and then to clear that, and eventually they get less and less, and you'll be propelled forward very, very quickly into the new consciousness. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that amazing presentation. And if you would like to know more tips and techniques to embrace living in the higher vibrations as we move into the new consciousness, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. And I'll see you soon.